All right, it's time now for the Sunday Roundtable. Joining us this morning, Democratic political analyst Marianne Marsh and Republican political analyst Rob Gray. Thank you both for being with us this morning. Let's start with Lori Trahan. Marianne, what do you make of her efforts to navigate kind of the mess that is Congress?
I mean, she's doing the best she can do, right? I mean, the one place she might be able to work with somebody is on NIL, which is great, but she's in a Congress with Kevin McCarthy beholden to Donald Trump and Marjorie Taylor Greene. They're not serving the American people, they're serving Donald Trump, and that makes it tough for Lori Trahan and every Democrat to get something done.
And it is problematic, Rob, when Republicans have control of the House with an all-Democratic delegation. There really isn't much that Massachusetts can get done, right?
There's not a power quotient. The Massachusetts delegation doesn't have a lot of juice, but I like what Lori Trahan's saying about the NCAA. I mean, she can succeed on issues like that where people from both parties can get behind. And let's face it, she doesn't have opposition, so she's in good shape politically.
All right, we have to talk Trump. His legal vulnerabilities are getting more and more serious. The judge in the documents case has set a trial date in May of 2024, right in the heart of election season. But is this really all locked in with Republican voters? They're riding the Trump train to the end, it seems. Rob?
They are, except that the majority don't want Trump, but they're kind of stuck on the Trump train here because he's in a dead heat with Biden. And because of that, people are like, well, he can win. He may be the only person who can win. His opponents are underperforming. So that's where we are. It's Trump by default. 31% of voters don't like either Trump or Biden. So I'm going to be interested to watch the third party thing. It may come into play soon after the Republican primary.
Marianne?
Well, I mean, indictments only help Trump in the primary, hurts him in the general election. Being in a trial, at least one so far during an election, makes him even more of a martyr, more of a victim. And that has galvanized Republicans behind him. The polls are inescapable on that. But the reality is that he is actually more afraid than anything else. I mean, he puts the tough guy act on. But look at that post he had this week on his social media platform, where he basically sounded like a mob boss saying, "You hurt me, I'm going to hurt you." So he's operating out of fear, and that's what we have to look forward to in 2024.
Any of these indictments moving the needle one way or another? His supporters just seem to be moving more toward him when he gets indicted.
But it polarizes the whole field, but the Republicans dig in with him. Independents abandon him. Democrats already parked over here.
Is that a smart move, though? Because they do support him, the Republican, the other candidates, but it's not moving the needle for them either.
Yeah, but they get their information from somewhere else. They don't believe the polls. They don't believe the news coverage. They don't believe, I mean, talk to any of them, and that's why it's doing.
It's a similar dynamic in both parties because Trump has the fame and the power and the money. Same with Joe Biden. But the core of voters in both parties are not happy with their party's likely nominee.
But Biden beat Trump. So.
All right, Boston Mayor Michelle Wu, she's explaining why her administration gave a list with the names of more than 24 of her critics to the city police department. She says it was never meant to be a hit list, as her critics have called it. Listen here.
This is really a matter of safety and having to protect the city workers who, unfortunately, like my family, for over a year have been subject to situations that have crossed the line.
Was this list meant to be an intimidation tactic to the people who are on it?
Certainly no. If anything,
we know that she has certainly endured more than her fair share of protests, insults, those kinds of things. But Rob, could this have been handled better?
Listen, it's legitimate to investigate people who have, threatened or caused harm to the mayor or any of her staff or her families. But this looks like an enemies list. We need to know a lot more. Where's the police commissioner talking about this?
They've said nothing about it.
Exactly. The police commissioner. So right now it looks like the police are under the thumb of the mayor. That's not the way it's supposed to work.
Marianne?
Oh, look. Should we have left the guy off who had a gun on his bike shooting at his enemy and put a bullet in the window of Modern Pastry? Or the former police officer who was harassing Michelle Wu all the time and then just didn't happen to assign a security detail to her when that was her job? I mean, the reality here is this is a public safety matter and nothing else. And for those who have equated it in this false equivalency of an enemies list, doesn't understand history to what this is. Really, I mean, it's a disservice to everybody, and the bandwagon effect effect of going on calling this an enemies list when what Richard Nixon did and this list has nothing to do with either one of them. That's how we lose our democracy. So for Michelle Wu, who's been treated worse than any mayor in my lifetime here, Marty Walsh didn't get this, Tom Menino didn't get this, Ray Flynn didn't get this. If this step wasn't taken and one of those people hurt her, wouldn't you wish after the fact that something had been looked into?
I agree. Real threats should be dealt with, but she has a security detail. They should be communicating with the police on a police-to-police level about real threats, and those should be dealt with. Somebody who politically is a political appointee of the mayor shouldn't be sending a list to the police commissioner or his underlings.
That's not how that went down. It was a Charlestown police officer asked for a list. And most of those people, to my knowledge, have actually harassed her or been involved in something like that. So I think everyone has handled this badly, but especially those who equated it to Richard Nixon.
Boston City Councilor Kendra Lara, she had her day in court answering to a car crash where she's accused of speeding, having no license, no insurance or registration, and no booster seat for her son. Here is what she said.
I want to say that there are often circumstances that prevent good people from checking off all of their boxes, and that sometimes manifest itself as things like unpaid fines. I know that as an elected official, I have to hold myself to a higher standard, and I intend to do that.
Now, she did not take questions, and some fellow council members, you saw them standing beside her in a show of support. Was much more required here, Rob?
I mean, I didn't check off all my boxes. Give me a break. Like having a license, like having your car insured, like having your car registered. And apparently these problems go back more than a decade.
Having no license for 10 years.
She's been brazenly ignoring it, driving around, putting people at risk, going more than double the speed limit as a residential area and crashing into somebody's house. Lawbreakers shouldn't be lawmakers.
Oh. She's being held accountable in the court of law. We'll see how that goes. She'll be held in the court of public opinion when she faces the voters in September. This is a judgment issue. We have plenty of elected officials who have escaped things like this before. However, the one thing that's indefensible is she didn't put her child in a booster seat. That's the one thing she could have controlled.
The law till they're 8. We're not done. More with the roundtable in a moment.